Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon. Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rural Woman Podcast. Today you'll meet Shelby Watson-Hampton. Shelby is a fourth-generation farmer, author, and agricultural advocate making waves in the farming community. Shelby is the director of the Southern Maryland Agriculture Development Commission and farms alongside her family at Hill Farm and Vineyards, where they grow wine grapes, operate a winery, and host amazing events. She's the author of the Amazon best-selling book, Grace, Grit, and Lipstick, Wit and Wisdom for the Modern Female Farmer and Her Farm-Curious Friends, and a freelance journalist for leading agricultural publications. Shelby's accolades include national recognition for excellence in agriculture, serving on the National Young Farmers and Ranchers Committee, and contributing to global initiatives in climate-smart agriculture. You are going to love this conversation with Shelby. It's dynamic. She's dynamic. The changes that their farm has gone through in the many years it's been operating and the growth that Shelby has had in the agriculture industry is really an inspiring story. I cannot wait for you to meet her. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with Shelby. Hello, Shelby. How are you?
I am doing so well. I am very excited to be here with you today. Thank you so much.
I am so excited to have you on the Rural Woman Podcast. Like I said to you before I hit record, I always feel like kind of a fangirl stalker when I log on to these calls because I feel like I know so much about you and I cannot wait to share it with everyone.
No, I love that because, I did the same and I've been listening to you for a few years now and had to go back on the website just to poke around a little bit. And it's just, I'm so excited to be here and I'm still not over being excited about being on podcasts because it's a lot of fun to connect with the community and to be featured. So thank you.
It is. Yeah. And it's fun to connect with the community and it's fun for me to be able to get to share your story. And for the folks who are unfamiliar with you, get to learn all of the things about you. So Shelby, give us your background. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and how you got your start in agriculture.
So I'm Shelby Watson-Hampton. We live on my family's farm. We're fourth generation. We are in southern Prince George's County, which is in southern Maryland. So about 45 minutes from Washington, D.C. It's quite a unique area because while our county, the lower portion of our county is rural and our small town is very rural, we are close to the big cities. So we are close to Washington, D.C. We are close to Virginia, like Arlington and Alexandria. The state capital, Annapolis, is not far away. And then, of course, Baltimore as well. So we have a little bit of both, growing up rural and then being city adjacent. So for my family life, my aunt and uncle and my husband and I restarted our fourth generation family farm about 10 years ago. And we pivoted to do a vineyard, a farm winery, and on-farm events in our wedding barn, which used to be our old horse and livestock stable. And also by doing that, my husband and I both work full-time. I am a director of a local quasi-governmental nonprofit called the Southern Maryland Agricultural Development Commission. And we work with 5 counties in our region to help farmers diversify, promote their products, connect with resources, connect with consumers. It's really neat because agriculture is very diverse in this area. So we do everything from A to Z. So I say everything from aquaculture to zucchini, because we do have oyster aquaculture farmers here as well, and everything you can kind of think of in between. And my husband also works an ag job. He is a planner with our local county soil conservation district. So he helps farmers with their soil conservation plans and various, plans for their farm and their business. We also have a toddler. He's 3. Let me tell you, 3 is not for the faint of heart. 2 is easy. At 3, he all of a sudden has opinions. So we're working on that. But he's a farm boy through and through. He loves it. Wants to be outside, wants to be on the tractor with dad. And I'm an active member of the agricultural community. I think like a lot of women in this space are, like you are, and all the other women you interview. We can't help ourselves but be on every board and commission that comes across our email for a little bit. So just last night we were at a farm bureau meeting for our county farm bureau. My husband sits on that board, but I'm a voting member. So we were there till, late at night. And I also did write a book recently because I guess I didn't have enough on my plate. But it's a book for women in agriculture. So I'm excited to share a little bit more about that.
I love that. And we're going to dive into all things Shelby. I want to go back to what you said about how about 10 years ago, you restarted the family farm. So take us through the generations of the farm and what the transitions have been through those generations.
Absolutely. So we have 4 generations on the current family property. However, my grandfather started the farm with my grandmother in the 50s. They got married right out of high school and they bought the farm at an auction a couple weeks after their wedding. And my grandfather also came from a farming family, but he was the 3rd son. So there was no more land left for my great-grandfather's farm to kind of hand down. So he went a whole 3.5 miles up the road and bought a new property. So when most people refer to their generations, they're talking about like on the current property, but ours goes further back as well. But the home farm, when my grandparents bought it, they were into tobacco and hogs. So tobacco was a main cash crop in most of Maryland for about 300 and so years, until about 20 years ago when the tobacco buyout program came through. So my dad and his 3 siblings, one of who is my aunt, the partner I'm in business with now, all grew up stripping tobacco, hanging tobacco, selling tobacco, and then feeding the hogs. And at one point they had, 500 or 600 head of hogs on the property in a farrow to finish operation. Both those markets kind of dropped out. And my grandfather decided to pivot to large tree and shrub nursery. So when I grew up, we were growing trees and shrubs. We were ornamental and shade tree nursery. And we were shipping trees, all over the eastern seaboard, up and down the coast, some out west. And we had like 100 acres of the shade and ornamental trees, either in pots or ball and burlap or in the field. That's what I grew up doing and working in the office there and in the field, with my family on that particular crop. And then we also had an agritourism component that my grandparents started in the late 60s, that we were kind of the first in this area to do like the, visit the farm, take a hayride, pick a pumpkin, see the animals, kind of educational thing. And so when I was growing up, all the schools from like multi-county areas, we would have like 1,000 school kids come through the farm a day, would send their kids for the fall field trip, and then we'd be open on the weekends when families would come in. So we grew up working that too. And that was just for the month of October. But because of that, October has always been my favorite month because it had so much like fun. I loved all of that kind of associated with it. And it kind of really set the scene for us as agritourism operators and direct market farmers, because we grew up with customers, like learning how to interact with customers, how to sell and be personable and be polite and show them the farm. So all that was happening. And then I was in college in 2005. I was an agricultural student at the University of Maryland here, which is our ag land grant. And my grandfather passed away very unexpectedly. So he was like here one day, he got sick, and 3 days later he was gone. And it rocked our world. Not only was he kind of the patriarch of the whole family, but the family business was full bore going. We had 4 or 5 family members employed full time, including my mom and both my aunts. And, we had like 30 other employees on the farm. So everything just kind of went sideways, and it took the family 5 or 6 years to recalibrate and to figure out, what to do from there. My grandmother ended up wanting to retire the nursery business and the agritourism. She didn't want to do it without my granddad. The spirit had kind of gone out, which we totally understand and respect. The property was divided up amongst the 4 siblings, and my aunt actually ended up with the home piece where the businesses were situated, like where the farm office was and the acreage around that. And so when I got out of school, I went to work for another farm. I was a farm manager at another farm down the road, another agritourism operation. And it was kind of the same time my aunt, everything got situated. It took years, like with the will and everything that went with it. And finally, her and I sat down one day and we were like, what can we do? She's like, what can we do with the farm? And she knew I wanted to help, and we wanted to continue the family legacy. We wanted to come up with something, and we needed something that was going to pay for itself, right? And at the time, my husband and I, we were engaged. We weren't married yet, but he also grew up in a farm family. Weirdly enough, also tobacco and hogs. And his family had also gotten out of that when the economy went down, and they'd gotten in construction instead. But he went away to college, and I went away to college, and we'd come back, and through mutual friends, started dating, and been dating a few years. By the time this came around, we were engaged, and he had started studying, chemistry and biology and horticulture. So he had that brain, plus he was a farm kid. So the 3 of us sat down and we're like, okay, we're going to do something. And what we came up with a lot of help from our extension agents and our Department of Agriculture here and all the folks that were doing research at that time, was that the soil that we had that was so good for tobacco was also really good for grapes. So we're like, all right, we know nothing about the vineyard. We know nothing about wine except that we like to drink it, right? But we can learn. Like, we're farmers. This isn't our farming area, but we're going to go into it. Long story short, we decided it was a great idea to start a new business and plant a vineyard 2 weeks before our wedding. So the vines are exactly as old as our marriage is. And in that process of us doing all of this and talking to experts and hiring consultants, one of the grape and vineyard consultants we hired actually ended up dating my aunt, and then they ended up getting married. So they got married a couple years later in the vineyard, and he joined the business, and now it's the 4 of us. So, Susan is the owner. She is kind of like the senior partner, the person in charge. Her husband, Bob, is the winemaker. My husband runs the vineyard. And then I am social media, marketing, in the tasting room. I mean, we all do everything. Like, obviously Susan and Bob are in the tasting room too, but we kind of ended up settling into our roles, with our strengths and weaknesses to try to run the business. That's where we are today.
I love this story. What a transition from a hog and tobacco farm to now a farm that has beautiful vineyards, a tasting room. You can get married there. What a transition.
Yes, thank you. And, we're lucky because transitioning wasn't necessarily new for the family. My grandfather was very forward thinking, and he was an entrepreneur in the truest sense. He never worked for anybody but himself. And he did this thing where every 25 years or so, there was a change in the market or a change in consumer demand, and he would pivot. So that made it a little bit easier. Now, did people still think we were crazy? Absolutely. Did my grandmother throw a dish rag at me in the kitchen the first time I told her we were going to plant a vineyard? Absolutely. Like, it was still going out on a limb, but we did it. And my Aunt Susan, I mean, really, I can't say enough. Her and my uncle are there full time because they're older than us and they're at that point in their life. And so they're there full time. My husband and I are part time because we do have our day jobs, and we can't quit our day jobs yet. We need the health insurance. We need the 401k. We need the security that comes with that. So between the 4 of us, we make it all work. But having my grandmother get the farm from my grandfather, and then having my grandmother have it to pass it to my aunt, and then my aunt to bring me into the business. You don't often see a matriarchal, line there. I didn't say that right, but you know what I mean. Matriarchal lineage is where I'm going. And so I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is so cool. And it lights my fire, obviously, to hear these stories. I'm curious to know what your grandmother's opinion of this vineyard is now post dish rag and many years later.
She is all about it now. So she still lives on the farm. She's 88. She just had her birthday last week. And the farmhouse sits up on a hill. We kind of have hilly land here. And at the hill that it sits on, it looks down over the wedding barn on this side, and then it looks down over the vineyard and a little piece of the winery on this side. And she can sit on her glass enclosed front porch and just like be the eagle eye, right? And she carries her cell phone in her sweater pocket, and she calls whenever she sees something or, sees something going on or people coming in and out. And she loves it. She's excited. She's still kind of blown away, I think, about how fast it grew and how that people really are willing to, come here and see the countryside and drink wine. She does not drink wine. She's a Corona girl all the way. So she doesn't drink the product, but she does enjoy watching other people.
I love Grandma. I love her already.
Grandma's sassy, let me tell you.
I find it even like you're talking about your grandparents and how when they started, they're doing something different. They're having that pumpkin patch back in the 60s, which again, I'm sure their parents looked at them like they were crazy for doing this.
That's funny. I should ask because I was lucky enough to know my grandfather's parents, both of them. I had great-grandparents through elementary school. And then my grandmother's mother as well, my other great-grandmother. And I never asked. That's a good question. I'm curious.
Something to bring up at the dinner table next time.
Absolutely.
So looking at the different transitions throughout the years, obviously you said your grandfather was the type who every 25 years or so, if things needed to be changed, he was ready to go. Do you think that is where you got your spirit of, changing things or doing something differently came from?
Yeah, absolutely. So we grew up very close. So all 18 of us lived on the farm, which at its heyday was almost 1,000 acres, basically, in a couple of different parcels up and down the road. And so I grew up right next door to my cousins. I grew up, right down the road from my second cousins. I mean, we have a big extended family. And my grandparents almost raised us just as much as my parents did. I mean, that's how much influence they had, which I think is really common with farm families too. So yeah, I grew up watching Granddad. He was not afraid to take risks. He was a fun-loving guy. He leaped before he looked a lot of times, but he had, he pulled it off. And it's funny, in my family, that did one of two things for you. Either like myself and my aunt, we were like kind of that way where we're go-getters and excited and extroverted and want to get out. Or so in my family, you're either an entrepreneur, doing your own thing, your own business, or you're like, I need order and stability, and I'm going to go right into the military or right into law enforcement. My dad and my brother and my nephew are all police officers, and both my brothers were Marines, and my oldest niece just joined the Army. And I'm like, I want to be nowhere where somebody's telling me what to do, what to eat. Like, I'm going to go on this side with the farmers and the entrepreneurs. But God bless them, right? There's like a spot for everybody.
Yep.
So we have a lot of that in the family too. So yeah, it definitely influenced, I think, folks' decisions.
It's so good. So you mentioned that you planted the vineyard 2 weeks before your wedding, which I think it's brilliant because at that time you would still, in theory, be able to call everything off if it went really bad. But it seems to have turned out good.
So it's funny. We have a wedding photo of my husband and I walking through the vines on our wedding day. And the vines are nothing that when you get them, when you first plant them, they look like dead little sticks. I mean, they're in these grow tubes, these plastic tubes you put around them to protect them and kind of keep them warm. And so us walking through the field, it's like there's trellis and there's wire and then these just rows and rows of plastic tubes, and us. And then now when we take family photos in the vineyard, it's like, they grow so tall and so high, and the vines kind of take over, and you have to prune them back, trim them back so that you can actually walk through the rows and keep it orderly. And you can really see the growth. So it's kind of like the growth of our marriage.
Absolutely.
I do have a funny story, though, if you want to hear it.
I would love to.
We were planting and getting everything ready right before the wedding, and I had my day job. At that time, I was working at the Maryland Department of Agriculture, so our state Department of Ag, and I was in the farmers market and marketing division. And I had a conference I had to go to that was like 2 hours north. So I was driving up with a coworker. We were going to stay at a hotel, do the conference, and then come home the next day. So I'm on the road, and I get a call from my husband, at that time, fiance. We were 2 weeks from the wedding, okay? And I picked up the phone. I'm like, hey. And the first thing he says is, I'm okay. I'm like, oh, great. Why are you okay? He's like, well, I was in the shop, and I was fixing the tractor, and he was doing something underneath with like a skill saw. And he's like, and I cut myself on the head, but it's not that bad. Your Aunt Susan's taking me to get stitches. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, like, where on your head? He's like, I don't know, kind of like on the crown or whatever. And I'm like, he's playing this. I know he's playing this down, but I'll call Susan in a minute and get the story. And I said, what hospital are you going to? And he told me it was a local one. I said, okay, all right, well, call me when you get there. Love you. I'm sure it's going to be fine. Whatever. So I hang up the phone and I look at my coworker who's driving and I'm like, we have wedding photos in 2 weeks. I have to handle this. My sister-in-law, my brother's ex-wife, who I'm still close to, the mother of my nephew, my sister-in-law, her new husband was a nurse at that hospital. And I called Stephanie and I was like, hey, Wade's on his way. I need to know if Steven's working. I need to know how bad the head lack is. And I also need to tell them, do not shave his head. Do not shave his head. Whatever they can do, please do not shave his head. Like right before the wedding. She's like, okay. So they get there. Well, of course, he ended up with 12 staples, okay, from hairline to back. He didn't cut his head. He opened it. All right. Blood on the shop floor looked like he'd slaughtered a pig. Okay. There's a whole situation. Anyway, so he ends up getting staples in his head, but they're covered by the hair and it looks fine. He's fine. He gets his tetanus shot, his antibiotic. A week before the wedding, we're pounding posts in the vineyard, into the ground, the little skinny posts that the grow tubes go around. And I hit my thumb with the hammer and I totally bust my nail off. And it's gross and there's blood everywhere. And I have to go to the Minute clinic down the road, get a tetanus shot, get it bandaged, whatever. The day of the wedding, I went to get my nails done, like you do. And I got them to put a false nail on. So in my wedding photos, there wouldn't be this dead, disgusting finger. We go to our honeymoon, we come home, and we both have to go get our staples out and our bandage fixed, okay? So he goes to the Minute clinic before I do, like the one down the urgent care down the road. He goes like whatever. And then like 2 days later, I go in. And I'm making random conversation with the nurse who we don't know. And she's like, oh, you just got married. And I was telling her, yeah, I bashed my thumb right before. She goes, oh, honey, that's nothing. You should have seen this guy came in 2 days ago and he had all these staples before his wedding. And I was like, yeah, that's the one I married. She was like, oh my God. I was like, we're farmers. I don't know what else to say. Like, yeah.
Oh my gosh. I love that story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's there, never a dull moment around
Never
here.
a dull moment on a farm anywhere. I love that.
But his head, my thumb, the vineyard, and the marriage are all still intact. So
amazing. That's amazing. So I want to learn more about the vineyard. What kind of grapes are you growing? What kind of wine are you producing? Tell us about the events. Tell us everything.
So we have a little over 5 acres planted, which might not sound like a lot to some people, but grapes are very labor intensive in the fact that it's all hands-on. Like you're doing everything by hand. You're, pruning, tucking, tying, harvesting, trimming, everything is happening by hand. My husband can trim the canopy with a tractor. We have an attachment that actually goes over the side in the summer months. And then we also do have a leaf pulling machine. And those are 2 big additions that saved us some time, which was great. But we have 6 varieties. So our reds are Merlot, Cab Franc, and Chambourcin. And then our whites are Vidal Blanc, Chardonnay, and Chenin Blanc. And it's wonderful because with those 6 varieties, you can do, single barrel varietal, or you could do a lot of different blends. So at this time we actually just added, I think we have 17 wines available. And our red blends are a lot like you would find in Bordeaux because our soil is very similar to French Bordeaux type of soil. We do both in stainless steel and in oak barrels. So you'll get some things that are very clean, stainless steel finish. You'll get some that are from the oak barrels. And randomly, and this is very exciting, and the fact that this is happening now is kind of cool to talk about it. We enter competitions, like winemaking and tastemaking competitions just to kind of keep up with the industry and see where we are. So we've won state awards, national awards, a couple international awards. It's been really cool. But we entered some wines into our state competition. It's called the Maryland Governor's Cup. And it's basically like the biggest thing you can win for wine in the state. And we entered these couple reds that we were like, these reds are going to do really good. And then like a few whites, we just like send everything. And we got really excited because one of the reds came back with a double gold medal. We're like, yes, that's amazing. Yeah, totally. And then our white Vidal Blanc won the whole damn thing. Won the Governor's Cup. Just blew us out of the water. We're like, what? Say it again? And we've only been in the industry for 10 years and we just beat out 180 other wines and 101 other wineries. Become the top wine and a double wine tasting in Maryland right now. And we actually just got the Governor's Cup, which is actually a cup. They give it to you. It's like and of course my uncle is a winemaker. And so that was a really big thing for him. I think he got a little misty eyed, right? He was like, well, yeah. we always say great wine starts in the vineyard because you can have good wine without good grapes. So the whole family, everyone's blood, sweat, and tears, actually, literally blood, sweat, and tears have gone into that vineyard at some point in time or another. So to have that for the family was really cool. And we just went last week and got a little ceremony, got the cup, got our pictures taken.
That is amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And now I really want a glass of wine.
Well, I will say, I know a lot of your listeners are in Canada. I honestly don't know if we ship to Canada, but we do ship across the United States. There are like 39 to 40 states that allow wine to come in, and it is available online. So if you want to try it, that Governor's Cup winner is our Bliss. It's our white Bliss.
I'm writing this down on my paper.
You find it online. And that would be, I have never even said the farm name. I apologize. It's Robin Hill Farm and Vineyards. Robin like the bird.
Yes.
Robin Hill Farm and Vineyards. You can find this online.
Tell us about the events that you have at Robin Hill.
That also started with the wedding. So when we were getting into the business, we're like, we're going to plant this vineyard and we're not going to make a profit for like 4 or 5 years because you have to wait that long for the grapes to come to maturity and fruition and do the thing. So we're like, what can we do in the meantime to pay for all this stuff we've got to do? So farm weddings were really taking off like 10 years ago. And I had always wanted to get married on the farm. So we renovated our stables, which was the horse barn. And it was a large structure. You would walk in, dirt floor. To the left were the stalls where the horses and cows would be. And above that would be the hayloft. And then on this side, on the right side, was all the equipment storage, like all the tractors and stuff were parked in there. So we poured concrete, pressure washed the walls. Oh my God, my husband took a handheld pressure washer, climbed up in the rafters, 40 feet above the cement floor, and hand washed I think God, he didn't fall, all the rafters and the walls and everything. We hung a chandelier in there, we just got started. So our wedding was the first one on the farm, and we used all the photos for our advertisements. We used it for the website and Facebook and the Instagram and the brochures. And so, we had our photographer doing like product shoots basically in with the wedding shots. And then my Aunt Susan, we had advertised that we were going to start doing weddings and that we were booking, for the coming months. And so she had 6 couples who were interested actually come to my wedding to view it before we got started. Like when we were doing like our bridal party shoot, she was touring them through everything that was decorated and pretty. And all 6 ended up.
That's amazing. So essentially your wedding was a write-off then because it
essentially
was marketing.
And it was so funny because I didn't know Susan was going to do that. And so we're doing like our photos or whatever. And one of my bridesmaids leans over and she goes, who are those people and why are they here 2 hours early? And I'm looking and I'm like, I don't know any of them. I was like, are they friends of my parents? I'm looking. And then I see Susan walking in front. She's talking, pointing. And I was like, oh my God. I said, those are couples. Those are prospective customers. And I busted out laughing. And I was like, that's so smart. Like, good for her.
I love Aunt Susan. Good for her.
She's come on a couple of podcasts with me before, and you guys can find her on the Farm Her episode we were in. If you follow Farm Her, I think it's season 2. You can look us up. Grandma's in there too. We drive her on camera as well.
That's awesome. That is so cool. And I just love that, you have that entrepreneurial spirit throughout your family. And I know in farming families, that doesn't always happen in such a collaborative way. There are definitely the folks who are not open to the change and are not open to things changing on their operations because this is how their grandparents did it, this is how their parents did it, and this is how we're going to do it.
Maryland is really unique in that way, especially Southern Maryland. So we do kind of consider ourselves like a microcosm at the bottom of the state here. I mentioned tobacco before and the tobacco buyout. So like 90% of the farmers in Southern Maryland were tobacco farmers generations back. And it was a cash crop. It made money. You could support a full family. It was a lot of work though. It was hard work. And again, hands-on work. But when the master settlement agreement with the cigarette companies came through, in the 90s, governors of multiple states decided to take the buyout that the federal government was offering. And that was basically, you could pay farmers for 10 years not to grow the tobacco. And they had to transition into something else. So they got paid, depending on what they were making in previous years based off their, weights and their sales and things like that. But once you signed the paperwork, that land and you as a farmer could not be used for tobacco again. So there was a massive industry pivot. So everyone around here that does some sort of pumpkin patch or pick your own or lavender farm or oyster aquaculture or agritourism, beer, wine distilling, they all used to be tobacco farms. And now they're all something else.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of in the air, in the culture. Now we still have some traditional grain farmers too. We have some bigger guys that do, your corn and your soybeans and your wheat. Of course, hay is a big industry here because we have a lot of horses. And those are what you more think of your traditional. But a lot of folks around here have had to be open-minded and shift. And because we have those markets so close, the DC area and Virginia and Annapolis, you have the consumer. So if you can get them to you, they will spend money. And a lot of them have federal government jobs. So we're kind of in a higher income earning bracket here for some folks, which really means potential customers.
Yeah. Very neat. Very cool. So I want to pivot our conversation to something that we were chatting about before we hit record, and something that is near and dear to both of our hearts. And that is mental health in agriculture. Something that is obviously super important to talk about. I try and bring it up in every conversation that I have because I just want it to be a normal conversation that we have. So talk to me about, the state of mental health in agriculture in your area and the changes that you've seen throughout your career and lifetime in the agriculture industry.
It is becoming much more of a normal conversation, and I'm so grateful for that. There are a lot of farm groups internationally, nationally, and locally who are doing some heavy work in the area. So one's off the top of my head. We have a land-grant university as the University of Maryland. The ag school is there. So our extension agents come out of that school. And both the college, the university, and the extension agents have done a huge push for mental health in the farming industry. In fact, right now they're offering 6 free therapy sessions for families who are in farming and in ag who can come together and talk about transitions and stress and how to manage daily life. And they plaster that everywhere. Every conference we go to, that it's online a lot. They're constantly advertising for it, and that's amazing. We also have our Maryland Department of Agriculture has a mediator that is free. So she's a mediator for either family to family issues or farmer to neighbor issues or, farmer to farmer issues. And you can contact her to set up mediation sessions around issues. And then, of course, the American Farm Bureau Federation, of which we're members, have done a lot in this area too. Farmer mental health and farmer stress at their workshops, the workshops at their conferences, they always have, stuff on that. And there's other groups, the National Farmers Union, the Young Farmers Coalition. I feel like there isn't a single farming entity right now who hasn't touched on it. And I think that is so very important. However, it's definitely generational, right? I feel like I'm an elder millennial, or whatever that means. But the millennials and the Gen Zs, and I guess AWFL coming behind us, are much more open to the conversation, much more open to seeking resources and to getting assistance. You still have Xers and boomers and, folks a little bit older than boomers that are still might be involved that still have the stigma and the reticence about any sort of mental health accessibility. And that's hard. And I don't know how you fix it, but I think we're definitely trying. Of course, in my personal story, there's a section of this in my book as well. So I have 2 brothers, an older and a younger. My older brother was so much fun, just the life of the party. I mean, just a trickster, a jokester, everywhere he went was a good time. But he struggled a lot with depression and anxiety too, I think. And I think a lot of it went undiagnosed. And he tried to deal with it a lot on his own. And then, like some people do, you turn to, recreational alcohol, or recreational drugs, not just to go through your party stage, but also to kind of deal with some of those mental health issues. And so he lost his battle with depression when he was 28. And I was 18 and our younger brother was 16. And of course, I was a freshman in college. It was just, it tore the world apart, for us. And I'd seen him struggle with it. So it wasn't just, that incident, it was leading up to it. And there are other folks in the family who have addiction issues, especially alcohol. And it's something we're cognizant of and we've seen folks battle. And, there's stigma around all of it. And it's just something that needs to be talked about more because any life that we can save, is worth the hard discussions. So.
Absolutely. Shelby, what was your brother's name?
Russ. So there's 5 of them. So my grandfather's Russell, my dad is Rusty, my brother is Russ, my nephew is Little Russ, and now my great nephew is Russell again.
Amazing. I love that.
There's 5 of them. Yes, I'm a great aunt. Can you tell?
I can't.
My oldest nephew made me a great aunt 6 weeks after I myself gave birth.
Wow.
So I became a mother and a great aunt in the same 6 weeks.
Wear that with pride because you look great for a great aunt.
Why, thank you. I need to start carrying butterscotch candies in my purse. Yes, that's what happens when your older brother is 11 years older than you.
Right? Yeah, that is a big age difference. Thank you for sharing that story. And, we talk a lot, again, about mental health and agriculture, and it's such a broad umbrella. When we're talking about mental health, we're talking about, depression, anxiety, but we're also talking about the addiction, and we're talking about alcoholism and drugs and things. And it is so prevalent in our industry. And the more that we can talk about it and we can talk about the effects on families, I think it's so important, and to have resources for people, but to also know that people aren't alone in the struggle of it.
And once you start talking about it, like it's not something you bring up in a light conversation, but once you start talking about it, or getting into that stuff, there are so many people who've gone through a similar situation, and you connect where you're like, oh my God, I had no idea, your dad or your brother or your, aunt or your cousin, like it is very prevalent, but it's still very hush hush, and people don't want to bring up sad things, and people don't want to bring up tough discussions, and nobody, wants to feel judged or be judging, but it's kind of like, there is comfort in the collective being held that way together when you've gone through something like that, And so the more you talk about it, the more people open up and you realize you're not alone.
And you mentioned the generational thing and how, our generation and younger generations seem to be more open to talk about these things in more of a conversational way, not in negative light, saying, yeah, this is what happens. This is how people's brains function. This is how we can help people. All of these things. We're having these conversations. And I'm looking at the older generations who maybe at one point felt uncomfortable, A, to talk about this, or B, to hear about it. I feel as though now they're coming to the table in small ways by saying, I see that you're struggling with this. My father had problems with depression or XYZ. And we're hearing more and more about how generationally, especially in agriculture, mental health has affected operations.
Oh yeah, affected the family, affected the business, affected the decisions made about the land.
Yeah.
Affected marriages. I mean, there's nothing that doesn't get caught in that ripple effect. And learning how to deal with it is a skill set. And some people deal differently, and that's okay. I myself am recently back in therapy, not for anything in particular, although I have generalized anxiety disorder as well. I take a low-dose Lexapro for it. God bless that. I've been on that for a while. And I, was working through some stuff and just like, you know what, I need to find someone just to work through this. And I go to my therapist virtually. It's just easier because it would be an hour drive each way if I had to leave the country to go for. And I meet every 2 weeks. We sit down, we chat, we open up, we work through some tools. It's been great. I love that people are open about talking about it because there is another agricultural podcaster that I follow. Her name is Emily Rochelle. Have you ever listened to Emily?
Yep.
Okay. She's great. And she's got back into therapy last year, and she talks about it and how this is so great. And her and I, we've become online friends. So we DM each other and share chats and stuff and talk about it. And then there's another podcaster, a national podcaster who I do not know personally, but Jenna Kutcher. I follow her. She's amazing. And she talks about, she's gone back to therapy. And these women are entrepreneurs, businesswomen, moms, wives, multimillionaires, some of them with 6 businesses, and they're doing all the things. And you're looking at them like, man, they're dynamic and they're powerful and they stand in their truth and they're doing so great. And yeah, they go to therapy because that's what helps them do all of that.
Right.
I'm almost getting to the point where I'm judging people who have never been. Are you sure you don't want to just do a tune-up? Your car gets a tune-up, right? Don't you think you could? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely, it's bad to say, but yeah, judging people who have never been to therapy before, I'm like, why haven't you tried it? When we're talking about, peer pressure, let's peer pressure people into going to therapy. Because really,
into mental health, into being your best person. You go to the gym, right? If you want to get in shape, you go to a nutritionist if you want to fix your diet, you want to fix some of that mental and spiritual and emotional stuff, you go to a therapist.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Thank you for being open to sharing all of that and just making it relatable and having the conversation of It's just being like, this is what I do to make myself well, and it affects my business, it affects my family, it affects all of these things. So why wouldn't you want to do all of these good things for yourself?
Well, I'll tell you what, when I share this online, my mother's going to listen to it, and I guarantee I'll get a text message saying, you share too much. Sorry, Mom. I love you. It's all good. I promise.
Well, I want to jump in to you being a published author. Tell me how that came about, and tell us all about your book.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay. First things, I have always been a major book nerd. I was a kid who would get in trouble for staying up under the covers at night with a flashlight, in first and second, third grade reading books when I was supposed to be asleep. I would hide my books I was reading behind my math textbook in school, probably why math wasn't my best subject, but I've always been a big book nerd. And then in high school, I joined the newspaper, and in college, I wrote and got a few small things published locally. And I always said, I'm going to write a book someday. Like, I would love to write a book. And I just didn't know what about. And 5 or 6 years ago, I'd be driving. I did a lot of driving for work when I worked at the Department of Agriculture. My commute was like an hour and 10 in and an hour and 20 back. And I would think of all these things like, oh, that would be cool. I could write about that. And I would get in my computer and do a couple things, and it would just sit. And like a year and a half ago, I just got serious. I was just like, you know what? I'm going to get this out. Even if a lot of people don't read it, even if I have to self-publish, I'm going to do something. Well, I created most of the manuscript, and I had like the outline that you need for querying like publishers and agents and stuff like that. I started that process, and there's a lot of rejections in that, which is just part of the biz. Like, you just have to know that you're going to do that. But in the process, I was on Instagram one night, and I came across this random page, and it was called Midwinter Press, and it was a small independent woman-owned shop. She's just a one-man show in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And she was in my Instagram saying, I am open for author queries. I will take authors without agents or with agents. But if you have something you want to do, I'm going to run a contest where you can pitch me in the comments of this post. And in 3 weeks, I will read the best pitches, and I will pick one person who will get a free phone consultation with me. And so I saw it, and I was like, ooh. And I was like, no, you're not ready. And so I didn't do it. Well, the next night I saw it again, and I was like, if I do it, this could be a thing, and I don't know if I'm ready for the thing. Like, I want the thing, but am I really ready for the thing? So I didn't. And the third time I saw it, I was like, all right, okay. So I'm literally laying in bed typing with my thumbs, and I pitch my book. Well, 3 weeks later, I get an email, and it's from Betsy at Midwinter Press, and she's like, I loved your idea. You won the contest. Let's do a one-on-one call. So we did. And the rest is history. We ended up working together. So I was not self-published, but she is an independent publisher, right? So it's a small independent house. And I could never have done this process without her. In the becoming of it, we've become very good friends. And it's so wonderful to actually say the words like my publisher, my editor, have help in that process. And God knows she took what was a raw manuscript and just shaped it and honed it and made it what it is today. And in doing that, because having her, in my corner, we were able to publish through Ingram Sparks, which is a big distributor. And because of that, the book is actually available online at Target, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Amazon, and Bookshop, which is an independent. And you can order it from any of that. The day that I saw my book on the Target website, I almost fell out of my chair. And then you can also buy it, straight from my website as well. And we debuted it last November. I haven't said the title yet. The book is called Grace, Grit, and Lipstick: Wit and Wisdom for the Modern Female Farmer and Her Farm-Curious Friends. And it is a combination of memoir, narrative nonfiction, not self-help, I don't want to say that, but like kind of coaching a little bit in that space. And it's not just about me, I talk about my story, but it features 15 other farm and agricultural business-based women across both the US and a few in Canada, and about their stories and how they got started and what it's like to be a rural entrepreneur. And how you deal with certain things and what to look out for and what advice they would give. And all of those women included their real contacts in the book too. They either put like a LinkedIn or an Instagram or a Facebook or an email, so you can read the book, get to know them, and then go find them online. And when the book launched on Amazon, it was best-selling in its category for a month. So it was really cool. All that being said, I'm a breakout independent author-ish. And so all the marketing is on Betsy and I. And I have had all this push around all of it. When it first came out, it was great. And I did the conference circuit kind of in the winter. And then life took over, like my toddler, my day job, the farm. And now I'm just trying to get back into like, what do I do with my socials? I need to revamp my website. I need to put the book out there. I need to get back speaking at conferences. Like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? So I'm back in that like kind of mode as well.
The entrepreneurial mode of promoting your work.
And I do.
Yeah. I love this. So I'm very much in the same mindset of you of having an idea and sitting on it and then seeing something that's like pushing you towards that idea and the feeling of not being ready. What was the final push for you? What was that thing that said, I'm just going to do it?
I really don't know. And I question my judgment because I had just had a baby. I remember typing out, portions while I'm pumping, or like doing things on my phone while the baby fell asleep in my arms. And I'm like in Google Docs on my phone, typing in chapters. I think two things. One is that because I am such a voracious reader and I read all genres, I read fiction, nonfiction, everything in there that you can find. I couldn't find books for us. I couldn't find a lot of good books for rural women, women farmers, women ranchers, and like women in agricultural business. Now there are a few good ones, and I actually list them in my book in the end. I have like suggested reading. And I had read a few where I was like, ooh, this is good. Ooh, I want to write like this person. But then that was it. I read like the 6 that were on the market and then there were no more. And I'm like, we really need more. We need more books. And I was like, well, will anybody read it? So I had done my research, and in the US, farmers make up 1% of the population, and women farmers of that 1% make up 36%. It's basically like 1.1 million women who identify as farmers in the US, right? Like just over 1 million women farmers. And then I was like, okay, well, not just them, also their friends and their family who don't understand why they're maybe farming, or maybe they're customers at the farmers market who want to know more about their local farmers, or maybe not just farmers and ranchers, but, agribusiness. Like, I don't think the women who are in agribusiness or service-based ag industries are counted in that number. So I was like, okay, if I can capture like this market, and really speak to them and get involved, then hopefully some people will want to read the book and, want to connect through the book, because it's a point of connection. I leave all my socials in there too. And I'm like, come find me, come talk to me. I want an online community for us. I want a safe space, and so that's what clinched it.
So if somebody's listening to this right now who has that thing in their mind that they've been thinking about and haven't quite pressed play on the follow through of that idea, what advice do you have for them?
Do it. Do it slow. Do it in dribs and drabs. Do it when you get a chance. But don't not do it, because it's better to regret trying than to regret not trying. And I don't even feel like I'm qualified to give that advice, because there are so many other women I follow who have done what I've done, but they're New York Times bestsellers, or their podcast has 12 million listeners, or they have 30 million followers on Instagram. I'm not there. I am in the baby, teeny, tiny, like bottom pool of this. I want to be them. Like, that would be amazing, in theory. But at least I've started, and I am proud of that. It is overwhelming and a little terrifying, but it is a great ride. And so I would suggest also, there's also that trap we fall into of like, well, everybody's done it already, or in the market's saturated. It's not, because no one can tell your story. No one's lived your life in your segment of the industry or in your particular way. And we're all looking for each other, and we enjoy connecting. And I read all these women's books, and some of them read mine, and I've emailed some of these other authors and been like, hey, hi, I'm here too. Like, it's good to find a friend in the void, So I think whatever your artistic expression is, whether it's writing or, singing or creating or crafting, gardening, make room for it in your life.
Absolutely. That is solid advice. Tell us again where we can find your book.
Yes. So I actually have a bit of a personal farm brand. So you can find me at The Farmed Life, like the charmed life, but farmed. So on Instagram, it's at _farmed_life. And my website is thefarmedlife.org. And all the links are there. So The Farmed Life is kind of how I present the personal brand. And then the book is Grace, Grit, and Lipstick. And you can find that on the website. You can also find it online at Amazon, Target, Walmart, Barnes & Noble's, Books A Million, and Bookshop.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We're going to put all of your links in the show notes so people can find you and connect with you. Shelby, my last question for you is, what is the most rewarding part about being a rural woman for you?
I think the most rewarding part is watching my son fall in love with some of the same things that I love. Going to the barn and feeding the horses and watching the geese flying on the pond and just being able to have kind of that continued legacy. I think that's my favorite part.
Absolutely. All good stuff. Thank you again for sharing your story with us today. I truly appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you for all the good work.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer, and admin support from Kim & Co. Online. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre and Carrie Munven from Laystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon.